Hello everyone. Today, I will recap the movie The Finest Hours. The film is based on a true event. On February 18, 1952, a sudden natural disaster struck the eastern seaboard of the United States, causing a large oil tanker to split in two and threatening the lives of everyone on board. Although only half of the ship and 30 crew members remained, they fought bravely as water continuously poured in through the crack. What will be their fate? Please follow today's recap. In November 1951, in Massachusetts, United States, Bernie Webber worked in the Coast Guard. Although he was a bit shy, he adhered to his ideals and lived a simple life. He was eagerly awaiting a meeting with his girlfriend, Miriam, that night. To ease his anxiety, he went out with a friend. They planned a double date. Although he was a little disappointed that Miriam was not as he had expected, he quickly found himself attracted to another girl. Coincidentally, it was also Miriam, a beautiful, elegant, and lovely woman. The four of them soon gathered at the pub. Miriam and Bertie were chatting to get to know each other, when Gus suggested they go boating out to sea together. However, Miriam felt a bit nervous about going out to sea at night. Hearing this, Bernie decided to borrow a larger boat to make Miriam feel more secure. He found an acquaintance and told him about his plan. Upon learning that Bernie wanted to make Miriam happy, the man agreed to lend him the boat. In return, Miriam happily gave Bernie a kiss. Bernie and Miriam dated for a few months. During a romantic dance, Bernie gently taught Miriam each step. Miriam felt very happy leaning on his shoulder and decided to propose. However, Bernie disappointed her by refusing her proposal. Upset, Miriam immediately left the party and walked out into the snowy night. Bernie chased after her and tried to convince her to return inside because it was very cold outside. Miriam felt angry and asked Bernie if he really didn't want to marry her. Bernie explained that a big storm was approaching, and his job might not allow him to return home. He didn't want to hurt anyone. Miriam then asked him if he was afraid of the sea or of marriage. Bernie realized that losing her worried him more than anything else. So he agreed to choose April 16th as their wedding date, and would ask his boss for leave the next day. Miriam laughed happily, and the two looked forward to a bright future together. However, their plans were disrupted when two oil tankers, the Pendleton and the Fort Mercer, ran into trouble during a strong storm offshore. That night, the Pendleton was sailing from New York to Boston when a huge storm suddenly struck. Sailor Bernie noticed that the welds on the hull were not strong enough to withstand the storm. He immediately went inside to inform the captain to reduce speed, but it seemed the captain did not grasp the seriousness of the situation. Everyone inside was still relaxing after work. They watched movies, cooked, sang songs, and gambled, unaware that this storm could be life-threatening. Bernie and a friend named Pop were inspecting the hull when they were shocked to see water leaking in. Bernie quickly contacted the captain, but before he could do so, a large wave crashed into the ship, breaking the welds and sending water rushing inside, causing one crew member to fall to the ground from the impact. Bernie quickly opened the drainage chamber and contacted the captain, while Pop urgently called for everyone to come and reinforce the crack and move furniture to the upper compartments. They needed to act quickly because the pumps had a limited capacity. The crack was up to 5 meters long and was allowing water to flood into the ship, and soon the compartments would be completely submerged. However, recent incidents had damaged the power lines. Bernie could only run to the wheelhouse to inform the captain. But it was dark outside, and the waves crashing against the ship were making him sway. One more step would have been fatal, for their ship was now split in two, creating a horrifying sight before his eyes. Bernie trembled, unable to move. Before him, half of the ship was floating. Whether he believed it or not, the horrifying scene unfolding before him was real. The storm, combined with 10-meter-high waves, howled and pulled the other half of the ship under. He watched in despair as the bow sank beneath the waves, while the stern remained above water, with 30 crew members remaining on board. On land, when Bernie returned from the lookout, he heard that a storm had hit the seas off the coast, with winds of 50 to 60 miles per hour and waves as high as 15 meters, causing many accidents to boats. They might need the rescue team soon, but right now, Bernie was thinking only of marrying Miriam. He decided to go to the office to request leave, but as soon as he got there, before he could explain his reasons, he was ordered to work at the docks with Richard, who held a prejudice against him due to a past incident. They needed to tie up the fishermen's boats before the storm hit. Meanwhile, on the Pendleton, the crew was meeting to discuss how to escape the dangerous situation, as the captain was missing from the bow. No one knew if he had time to send a distress signal. A man named Brown suggested launching the lifeboats to get away. However, Many others disagreed because they did not know if those small boats could survive the storm, which led to an argument. Pop could only ask Sibbert to resolve the situation, as he was the most knowledgeable person about the ship. Despite the prejudices surrounding him, Sibbert said that when the water rose to the air regulator, the ship would lose power, and the pumps would not work, leading to everyone sinking into the ocean. Simply put, they only had about 4 to 5 hours to act. Brown became even more convinced of the lifeboat proposal, but Sibbert bluntly stated that the lifeboat would not last longer than 12 seconds after being lowered. Everyone was very angry at his calmness and suggested that they steer the ship with only the stern remaining. How could they steer like that? Sibbert peeled an egg and explained that they would insert a steel beam into the core of the rudder, then install a pulley to form a lever and move it by hand. Finally, they would run the Pendleton aground on a reef and start blowing the whistle to signal for help. Everyone was amazed by his unbelievable plan. At this time, the technician announced that the radio connection had been established, and they heard about another ship that was in the same trouble. This made everyone more worried. If all the rescue teams were on their way, who would save their ship? Meanwhile, Pop and a group were helping Sibbert steer the stern half of the ship. They had a hard time inserting the steel bar into the correct position on the rudder. However, the situation became more complicated than they had anticipated. Brown had encouraged some people to go up to the deck to leave by lifeboat. When he heard this news, Sibbert did not say much but picked up a hammer and cut the rope, causing the boat to fall into the water. Brown got angry and attacked Sibbert, but everyone quickly intervened to stop him. At the same time, the lifeboat was hit by a strong wave, causing it to break into many pieces. At this point, everyone could only do as Sibbert suggested. Some people stood on the deck to observe the direction, while another group was arranged along the corridor to inform Sibbert below. They quickly discovered a nearby reef. Sibbert steers the ship based on the navigator's directions. They were facing death as the water in the hold kept rising, and the reef ahead was the group's chance of survival. However, a huge wave hit the ship again. Seawater rushed in, washing everything away and breaking the rope holding the oars. An iron bar struck the side of the ship, creating a large hole. Sibbert lost control. He could only try to slow down before the ship passed the reef. Meanwhile, he discovered that the chains were stronger than the ropes. On land, a man returning home saw a large ship in the distance with a siren. He immediately drove to where Bernie's group was tying up the fishing boat. At first, they were suspicious because the boat was far from the shore and quite dim. However, after hearing the opinions of the people, Bernie decided to return to inform the boss, Clough. He immediately contacted Boston and received information that a plane had flown over the area and saw half of the stern of the Pendleton. But Boston and the surrounding areas had set all their boats to rescue Mercer. Now they didn't have enough manpower. Finally, after thinking for a while, the boss decided to assign Bernie to form a rescue team. The others were very disappointed with Clough's decision, because everyone knew that this action could lead to death. They advised Bernie to just make a few laps and then return. Bernie went to the dining room to find someone to accompany him. Unexpectedly, the first person to volunteer was Richard. Gus wanted to join, but he was seriously ill. So Fitzgerald, a third-class mechanic, took his place. Finally, there was Salon, a new recruit at the lighthouse. Miriam sensed that something was wrong and immediately called her fiancé. However, Bernie did not answer the phone. The four of them then set off on a small boat, equipped with only minimal amenities, despite the raging storm. Miriam felt anxious, so she drove herself to the rescue station. Gus advised her to calm down and wait with them for good news from Bernie. When Miriam learned that he was about to cross a large sandbar, she became even more worried. The sandbar was unstable. It moved with the waves, and if he lost control, the boat could hit it and break apart. Miriam could not bear it any longer, so she went to find Bernie's boss. He was in contact with her fiancé and did not care about the dangerous situation, only ordering Bernie to continue toward the Pendleton. She was very angry and repeatedly asked him to let them turn back. However, he did not care and chased Miriam away. Feeling both worried and angry, she immediately drove off. However, the slippery snow-covered road caused Miriam to hit a pile of snow and get stuck. Meanwhile, the rescue boat was getting closer and closer to the sandbar, but the storm caused thick fog to obscure the view, making the situation even more dangerous. Bernie could only listen to the sound of the waves to judge the location of the sandbar. Soon, a terrifying sight of the ocean appeared before them, waves 30 to 40 feet high and winds blowing up to 60 miles per hour. Although he knew the danger that awaited him, Bernie still led the rescue team forward. Amid the fierce waves, The small boat was constantly capsized by the force of the sea. The team members had to work closely together to keep the boat from sinking. However, they could not avoid the dangerous waves. If they didn't get out of this sandbar, the boat would soon be destroyed. In order not to be late, Bernie accelerated, trying his best to get over the sandbar. However, just after passing a wave, the boat encountered a problem, and the engine died. Richard and Fitzgerald immediately went inside to repair it. Suddenly, another huge wave came. If they didn't act quickly, everyone would drown. The group had only 5 seconds left before a 10-meter high wave would sink the boat. Fortunately, they restarted the engine and overcame the obstacle, but the danger was increasing. Bernie asked Fitzgerald and the rookie to go back inside. Then he used his experience and instincts to continue battling the storm. Relying on his knowledge and experience, he faced the giant waves before him. After many moments of fearing they would be swallowed by the sea, they suddenly emerged. Indeed, things that don't kill you often make you stronger. Finally, they crossed the deathly sandbar. Everyone looked at each other, unable to hold back their tears. However, things had only just begun. The sky was dark, and the storm was getting stronger. Finding the wrecked ship was a real challenge. Meanwhile, the Pendleton was slow to turn, causing them to miss their only chance. Sibbert decided to turn the ship 30 degrees in 2 minutes, and reverse it so that the waves could push them away. Everyone held onto the railing, preparing for the strong waves. Then, Sibbert lowered the ship so that it touched the rocks. Everyone encountered a strong impact when the bottom of the ship made contact with the rocks. The storm made the sea even rougher. The waves grew larger. Each new wave was twice the size of the previous one, continuously crashing against the hull, and now, the tide began to rise. The chain broke and damaged the oars. Although they had made a good landing, they needed to stop the water from flowing into the pumps to maintain power. Soon, the rising tide would cause their boat to slide off the rocks. On land, Miriam was given a ride home by a woman. There, she learned that the woman had lost her husband in a sea accident, and that the rescue team that year was led by Bernie. Although she could not bring her husband back to her family, she was still very grateful and told Miriam that Bernie was a good man. The lifeboat continues to search for the Pendleton, but after encountering a large wave, they lose their compass. Search and rescue in this dark sea seems hopeless. They cannot find Pendleton, and the fierce waves keep crashing into the boat, exhausting everyone on board. Bernie calls for help from the lighthouse station, but the signal is too weak for anyone to hear. The Chatham Lifeguard Station advises him to turn back. After learning that their efforts have failed, Richard and the others also encourage him to turn back, but Bernie disagrees. They have gone too far to give up. Bernie asks Fitzgerald to turn off the headlights, so that he can see the light from Pendleton. On the Pendleton, the cook tries to make the most of the limited ingredients to prepare dinner for the group, but their hopes are dashed when the power goes out. No one will be able to hear their cries for help, and even the strongest people begin to feel weak. Could the ship be saved? Bernie steered the lifeboat through the current in a state of confusion. After a long and difficult journey, he saw something ahead. They turned on their lights and spotted the stern half of the tanker rocking on the rocks. Just when they thought they were too late, a light from the ship shone down, revealing the crew clinging to the deck and screaming for help. However, a new problem arose. The lifeboat could only carry a maximum of 12 people, while there were now more than 30 people to rescue. Despite this, Bernie decided not to abandon anyone. The sailors quickly lowered the ropes. The large waves made it difficult for them, throwing people into the water or smashing them against the side of the ship. Although it was dangerous to get off the ship at this time, the sailors still decided to act. Some even willingly jumped straight into the sea. They believed that their ship would soon sink, so it was a reasonable decision to risk their lives to seek salvation. Sibbert saw a young sailor who was afraid to go down, so he and the cook comforted him. The cook decided to go first to reassure him, but unfortunately, the ship began to tilt, and the cook was thrown into the sea, struck by the propeller. Sibbert continued to comfort the young sailor, and everyone on the rescue ship also helped him, but at that moment, the ship was crowded. Richard wanted to leave immediately and return later, but Bernie knew that the trapped people could not wait. He risked his life to save everyone on board. When Sibbert finally made it to the lifeboat, half of the Pendleton had already begun to sink. In the end, they rescued 32 crew members from the tanker, bringing hope to the desperate people. The lifeguard station was shocked when they received Bernie's call, unable to believe the miracle that had just occurred. However, they now faced a new challenge, as the way back was still unknown since they no longer had a compass. Everyone placed their hopes in the captain because of Bernie's promise that everyone had tried so hard, and he would take them home. They did not know that The light serving as a guide on land had been extinguished due to the storm, causing the entire town to lose power. The rescue team and the survivors experienced terrifying moments drifting at sea. When Bernie felt exhausted and hopeless, he suddenly saw a light in the distance. The townspeople gathered at the port to await the return of the rescue ship. Miriam looked at the dark sea, which she had always feared, and turned on her car lights. The others followed suit, turning on their car lights at the same time. The light from their cars helped the lost individuals find their way home. When the rescue ship and the 32 survivors appeared, they returned to the pride of their families and the entire town. Clough did not come to pick them up, but he breathed a sigh of relief when he heard the news that they were safe. The image of the survivors hugging each other in tears as they were brought ashore left a deep impression on everyone, highlighting their bravery, humanity, sacrifice, and determination to overcome difficulties. Bernie remained alone on the ship, his hand shaking. Miriam hugged him happily. They left and discussed their upcoming wedding. This film is based on a real historical event, the rescue on February 18, 1992, which is considered the greatest rescue mission. Mr. and Mrs. Bernie and Miriam lived happily together for 58 years, until he passed away in 2009 at the age of 81. The film ends here. Kindness is something you give without expecting anything in return. If you were the main character, what would you choose when faced with the dark sea and the rough waves that could sink your small boat? Life is like a fisherman's voyage. Sometimes it is peaceful, sometimes it is stormy. However, you must be resilient to overcome challenges, otherwise, you will be swept away. So, always be strong to face all difficulties. Thank you for supporting. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like and comment on your thoughts about the movie. Also, subscribe to the channel to stay updated on the latest movie recap. See you again.